The Gardener's Secret. Alastair Finch hummed a tuneless melody as he clipped a dead head from a prize-winning Gertrude Jekyll rose. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his meticulously manicured garden, painting the vibrant blooms in shades of gold and crimson. Bees buzzed lazily around the lavender bushes, and the air hung thick with the sweet scent of honeysuckle. Peace. That was what Alastair had craved, what he had cultivated after a life lived on the razor's edge. That he straightened his aging knees, protesting slightly, and surveyed his domain. It was a far cry from the smoky back alleys and sun-drenched plazas he once knew. But it was home. That he paused, his hand hovering over another rose. A subtle shift in the atmosphere. Not a sound, not a scent, but a prickling awareness at the back of his neck. A sensation he hadn't felt in decades. He straightened fully. His blue eyes, though faded with age, sharpened with a familiar glint. The humming ceased. A black van, windows tinted, idled at the end of his quiet cul-de-sac. Too slow, too deliberate. A delivery van wouldn't linger like that. Alastair's grip tightened on the rose clippers. He didn't move, didn't outwardly react. He simply observed. Two men emerged from the van. Both were dressed in identical black suits, faces hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. Professionals. Alastair's muscles tensed. He'd face down worse, but never in his own garden, surrounded by the things he had grown to cherish. Mr. Finch. The taller of the two men spoke, his voice devoid of inflection. Alastair remained silent, feigning ignorance. Perhaps they had the wrong address. A foolish hope. He knew, but hope nonetheless. Alastair Finch? The man repeated, taking a step forward. We have a proposition for you. Alastair tossed the rose clippers onto the nearby stone bench. I'm afraid I'm not interested in propositions. He kept his voice light, conversational, masking the adrenaline that now coursed through his veins. The man in black nodded curtly. Pity. We were hoping to make this easy. He raised a hand, a signal. The second man stepped forward, drawing a silenced pistol from beneath his jacket. The glint of metal in the fading sunlight was all the confirmation Alastair needed. He moved. Not with the speed of his youth, but with a practiced efficiency honed by years of training and experience. He dropped to the ground, rolling behind a thick hedge of rhododendrons just as the first shot whizzed past where he had been standing. The silenced weapon made only a soft phut sound, easily masked by the evening birdsong. But Alastair knew what it was. He'd heard that sound too many times. He scrambled through the dense foliage, thorns tearing at his tweed jacket, and emerged on the other side, closer to the house. He needed cover, a weapon, anything. The shed. The two men were advancing, spreading out, their movements coordinated and precise. They were good, damn good. This wasn't some amateur hit. These were professionals, well-trained and well-equipped. Alastair darted across the lawn, bullets kicking up divots of earth around him. He reached the shed, fumbling with the latch, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline inside. Hanging on the wall amongst the gardening tools was a spade, hardly ideal, but better than nothing. He gripped the spade tightly, its wooden handle surprisingly familiar in his hand. He positioned himself behind the open doorway, waiting. The first man appeared, silhouetted against the fading light. He raised his pistol, scanning the interior of the shed. Alastair didn't hesitate. He swung the spade with all his might, the blunt edge connecting with the man's temple with a sickening thud. The man staggered, his gun falling from his grasp, and collapsed to the ground. The second man reacted instantly, firing into the shed. Alastair ducked behind the door, splinters of wood flying around him. He knew he couldn't stay there. He was trapped. He kicked the door open, sending it crashing into the second man, momentarily disrupting his aim. Alastair charged, wielding the spade like a medieval halberd. The man raised his arm to deflect the blow, but the force of the impact sent him stumbling backward. Alastair pressed his advantage, striking again, this time aiming for the man's legs. The spade connected with his knee, shattering bone. The man screamed, dropping to the ground, clutching his injured leg. Alastair stood over him, the spade raised, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could end it here. Now. Finish it. But something held him back. The life he had built, the peace he had found. It wouldn't allow him to become a cold-blooded killer again. He lowered the spade, his hand trembling. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. The man on the ground spat at him, a glob of blood-tinged saliva landing on Alistair's trousers. "You'll never know," Alistair sighed. He knew that look, that unwavering loyalty. He wasn't going to get anything out of him. He glanced at the other man, still unconscious on the shed floor. He wouldn't be much help either. He needed to get out of here, to disappear before the police arrived. He couldn't explain this, not without revealing a past he had desperately tried to bury. He went into the house. Moving quickly and efficiently, he grabbed a bag, stuffing it with essentials. A passport, some cash, a few personal items. He moved to the back of the house and out the seldom-used door. He glanced back at his garden. The roses bathed in the soft glow of the evening light. A pang of regret shot through him. He was leaving it all behind. Again, he disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving behind the idyllic life he had so carefully crafted. Forced back into the shadows he had fought so hard to escape, the gardener was gone, and in his place stood Alistair Finch, the spy, ready to play one last, deadly game. Echoes of Silas. The Land Rover, a veteran of countless expeditions, lurched along the uneven track, spitting stones as Alistair fought the recalcitrant wheel. His grip tightened, knuckles bone-white against the ingrained earth staining his skin. A quick glance in the rearview mirror revealed only an unbroken tapestry of Devon's verdant hills pressing in around him. He killed the engine beneath the stark silhouette of a solitary hawthorn, its branches gnarled by relentless winds. The sudden quiet amplified the lonely cry of a distant buzzard. A deceptive tranquility. He knew they wouldn't relent. Not these people. He raked a hand through thinning hair, flinching as his fingers found a throbbing bruise, a souvenir from one of the assassin's hasty blows. Tending roses was a far cry from battling lethal adversaries. He'd escaped by the skin of his teeth. Closing his eyes, he replayed the encounter, focusing on the chilling details, the precise, almost balletic movements, the chilling void in their eyes, the near-ceremonial handling of their instruments of death. Beyond mere competence, it was a brand, a calling card he recognized from carnage witnessed across continents. The scythe that a wave of nausea crested within him. He'd entombed those memories years ago, praying they were just specters from a former life, a nightmare banished. His eyes snapped open, resolve hardening his gaze. Sentimentality was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not now. He needed clarity. A strategy. He retrieved a dog-eared ordnance survey map from the glove compartment. He had to vanish, to locate sanctuary, a place to regroup and decipher why, after all this time, they hunted him. The why clawed at him. Decades since he'd shed the name Silas, he'd erased his past, severed ties, cultivated a new existence of quiet anonymity. What had disturbed the hornet's nest? Then, a memory detonated in his mind, vivid and unwelcome. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The warehouse loomed, a lightless maw filled with the reek of diesel and the palpable scent of terror. 10 years. Istanbul. Silas moved with the fluidity of smoke, a predator unleashed. The scythe held hostages, aid workers, demanding a king's ransom. His mission: extraction, no discussion, no appeasement, just neutralize the threat. The warehouse's blueprint was etched in his memory. The guard posts, the hostages' palpable fear, the captor's jittery desperation. He flowed through the space, executing a lethal dance perfected over years of brutal training. A silenced pistol nestled in his grip, a blade strapped snugly to his thigh. The first guard fell with a sigh, silenced by a precise strike to the carotid. The second never knew what struck him. Then, he registered her, a small figure huddled, dwarfed by the shadows, her eyes reflecting pure terror. Lily Harrison. Chuck Harrison's daughter. He hadn't known her identity then, only that she was a child, collateral damage in another man's avarice. He cleared the remaining sentinels with ruthless efficiency. A whirlwind of lethal motion. The ringleader, a scarred behemoth, seized Lily, pressing a blade to her slender throat. "Stay back," he rasped, his voice thick with desperation. Silas locked down. He could have ended it with a single shot, but the girl's proximity made it impossible. He lowered his weapon. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos. "This doesn't need to end like this." The leader emitted a harsh bark of laughter. "You think I'm a fool? The second I release her, you'll kill me." "I give you my word," Silas stated, a promise he might not be able to keep. The leader's gaze flickered between Silas and the girl, indecision warring within him, sweat beaded on his brow. His grip faltering almost imperceptibly, Silas seized the opening. That a flick of his wrist sent a throwing knife hurtling, burying itself in the leader's wrist, severing the nerves. The blade clattered onto the concrete, and the leader's agonized scream ripped through the air. His hold on Lily broken, Silas erupted into motion, disarming the wounded man and rendering him unconscious with a swift, disabling kick that he swept Lily into his arms, holding her tight. Her small body trembling against him, he carried her from the warehouse, oblivious to the carnage left in his wake. That he delivered her to the authorities awaiting outside, then vanished into the urban labyrinth, a wraith. Swallowed by the night. He never encountered her, nor Chuck Harrison, again. Asterisk. Alistair gasped, his breath hitched in his chest. Lily Harrison, Chuck Harrison. The pieces tumbled into place, forming a grim picture of inescapable truth. Chuck Harrison, a man indebted to him, a man rescued from unimaginable loss, at a debt that could be called in at any time, it seemed. The Scythe's memory was long. They employed Chuck, leveraged Lily, to draw him out, to extract payment for past transgressions. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, the plastic groaning under the impact. He had to safeguard them. He had to protect Lily, even at the cost of exposing his meticulously constructed facade. Even if it meant confronting the demons he had so diligently repressed. He ignited the engine, the Land Rover responding with a defiant roar. He knew his destination. He knew what he had to do. Alistair Finch, the retired gardener, was no more. Silas had returned, and this time, the stakes were profoundly, irrevocably personal. The hammer stirred. The mahogany table gleamed under the low, amber light of the private dining room. Chuck Harrison, a man whose tailored suit couldn't quite conceal the bulk beneath, listened to the drone of quarterly projections from the CFO of his shipping company. He nodded occasionally, offered a gruff, "Good," or "Keep it coming." But his mind was elsewhere. He felt a disquiet he couldn't place, a low thrum of unease that resonated deep in his bones. That a server, discreet and silent as a shadow, placed a small, folded square of paper next to his water glass. Chuck frowned. They knew better than to interrupt a meeting, especially not with paper notes in this digital age. He shot a sharp glance at his assistant, Maureen, who sat at the far end of the table, face impassive. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. He waited for a lull in the CFO's presentation, a space filled with the clinking of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation. He unfolded the note beneath the table. The message was brief, almost childish in its simplicity. "The rook moves pieces, watch the queen." Chuck's blood ran cold. It was a code, an old one, resurrected from a life he'd buried deep. A life where he wasn't Chuck Harrison, respected businessman, but the hammer. A man who broke things, people, for the greater good. Or so he'd told himself. He crushed the paper in his fist, the pulse in his temple throbbing. The rook. The queen. It meant nothing to anyone at this table, but to him, it was a siren, a klaxon blaring a warning he couldn't ignore. The rook referred to a specific faction within his old network, specialists in manipulation. The queen, Lily. It always came back to Lily. He cleared his throat, the sound rough against the polished veneer of the room. "Gentlemen, ladies, I apologize, but I need to cut this short. Something urgent has come up." There were murmurs of surprise, quickly suppressed. Chuck Harrison didn't apologize, and he certainly didn't leave meetings early. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, a sound like a growl. "Maureen, Handle the wrap-up, I'll be in touch. He strode out of the room, the scent of expensive cologne and nervous energy clinging to the air he left behind in the elevator. He leaned against the mirrored wall, the reflection staring back at him. A stranger in a well-cut suit, he saw the lines etched around his eyes, the faint tremor in his hand. Time hadn't softened him. It had only layered a thin veneer of respectability over something hard and unforgiving. He thought of Lily, her bright smile, the way she used to braid his hair when she was little. That he'd found her huddled in a doorway in Istanbul, orphaned and terrified. He'd brought her back, given her a life, a home, a future. He tried to give her what he never had. Safety. He rubbed his hand over his face, the rough stubble scratching his palm. Had he failed? Had his past finally caught up, not just with him, but with her? Back in his office, a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, he dismissed Maureen with a curt nod that he needed to think, to plan. The message was a deliberate intrusion, a shot across the bow. Someone knew about Lily, knew about his connection to her, and they were using it. That he had to find out who and why. He unlocked a drawer in his desk, a drawer he hadn't opened in years. Inside, nestled amongst faded photographs and forgotten trinkets, was a burner phone. Its battery long dead. He tossed it aside. A relic of a life he swore he'd left behind. He had better resources now. Cleaner methods. Or so he hoped. He picked up his secure line. A direct connection to a handful of individuals he trusted implicitly, men and women who understood the language of shadows and secrets. He spoke in clipped tones, his voice a low rumble that brooked no argument. I need information. Alistair Finch. Full background. Everything. Start with his current residence, known associates, recent activities. And I want it yesterday. He hung up, the silence of the room pressing in on him. Alistair. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. He owed Alistair a debt he could never repay. He'd entrusted Lily to him, believing he was giving her the protection she needed now. He wasn't so sure. The hammer was stirring. The unease had solidified into a cold, hard knot in his gut. He didn't want to go back to that life, to the violence and the deception. But Lily was involved, and for her, he would do anything. The suit felt wrong, constricting. He needed something more familiar, something that felt like a second skin. He reached for the phone again. Get Matteo on the line. Tell him I need a few things. Discretion is paramount. He paused, his gaze hardening. And tell him the hammer needs to swing. Unveiling the past. The hum of the server room was a constant, almost comforting drone. Chuck stood amidst the blinking lights, the cool air a sharp contrast to the sweat prickling his forehead. Around him, Marcus and Sarah, his two most trusted investigators, worked with focused intensity, their fingers dancing across keyboards. Anything solid? Chuck asked, his voice a low rumble. Marcus swiveled in his chair, his face illuminated by the glow of 3 monitors. Alistair Finch is a ghost. Chuck. Clean record, charitable donations, respected academic. But dig a little deeper and you find Silas. No birth certificate, no paper trail before 20 years ago. Just Silas. Sarah chimed in, her eyes still glued to her screen. Silas was good. Real good. Wet work, mostly. Quiet, efficient. Disappeared after one last contract. Rumor has it he burned the whole operation down on his way out. Chuck's jaw tightened. Alistair, the man he'd trusted with Lily's life. A killer. It felt like a betrayal etched into his very bones. He walked over to a whiteboard covered in timelines, names, and red string connecting them all. He ran a hand over a photograph of Alistair. The kind, grandfatherly face now seeming like a carefully constructed mask. Who was Silas working for? Chuck asked, though he already suspected the answer. Marcus hesitated. The syndicate. Before they fractured, before the infighting. Back when they were a cohesive unit. The syndicate. The name tasted like ash in Chuck's mouth. He hadn't thought about them in years. Hadn't wanted to. They were a hydra. Cut off one head and 2 more grew in its place. He'd spent years dismantling their operations, crippling their influence. He'd thought he'd buried them. Their MO was always control through chaos, Sarah said, breaking the silence. Destabilize, manipulate, profit. Chuck turned away from the board, his gaze fixed on a blank section of the wall. He saw flashes of the past. The blood, the screams, the cold, calculating efficiency of the hammer. A life lived in the shadows. A life he'd desperately tried to leave behind. He'd built a legitimate business, found solace in fatherhood, tried to atone for the sins he'd committed. Silas left a lot of bodies in his wake. Marcus continued, oblivious to Chuck's internal struggle. Made a lot of enemies. Powerful enemies. Could they be holding a grudge? Chuck asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Sarah shook her head. Grudges are messy. The syndicate prefers strategic long-term plays. They wouldn't wait 20 years for simple revenge. Chuck's mind raced. What was Alistair's endgame? Why disappear, change his identity, and then, what? Become a pillar of the community? It didn't make sense. Unless... He turned back to the whiteboard, his eyes scanning the connections. Lily? Alistair had been close to Lily. He'd been her mentor. Her friend. A slow dread began to coil in his stomach. What was Silas's last contract? Chuck asked, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus typed furiously, the clicking of the keys echoing in the room. Unconfirmed. Officially, it was a hit on a rival faction leader. But there were whispers, rumors of something else. Something personal. Personal how? Involved a child, Sarah said, her voice tight. A child the target was protecting. The pieces slammed into place with brutal force. Alistair or Silas had been tasked with killing someone protecting a child. He'd burned the operation, disappeared, and resurfaced as Alistair Finch that he'd gotten close to Lily. He saved her, Chuck said, the words catching in his throat. Years ago, there was an accident. A car. She was trapped. Alistair pulled her out. He saved her life. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look. He saved her from what? Marcus asked carefully. Chuck didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew. The syndicate hadn't forgotten. They hadn't forgiven. They'd used Alistair, used his guilt, his need for redemption, to position him perfectly. They hadn't wanted Lily dead then. They wanted her now as leveraged, as punishment, as a way to finally break the hammer. He ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the past crashing down on him that he'd tried to escape the violence, to protect Lily from the darkness that had consumed him. But the darkness had found them anyway. They're coming for her, Chuck said, his voice hard, the coldness of the hammer returning. They're using Alistair to get to her. He looked at Marcus and Sarah, his eyes burning with a fierce determination. Find him. Find Alistair Finch. And find out what the syndicate wants. He paused, his gaze hardening. And if they hurt her, if they even try, I will burn the world down to ash. Forced alliance. The news hammered into Alistair's ear, brief, brutal reports that landed like blows. The Oslo safe house, burned. Isabella in Prague, permanently silenced. The syndicate was systematically dismantling his world, sending a clear, unmistakable message. He was marked, exposed, and Lily was in the crosshairs. He squeezed the earpiece until the plastic threatened to give way. He had to reach Lily, warned Chuck. But even as he pivoted towards the exit, an icy premonition gripped him. Chuck wouldn't be waiting for a friendly debrief. Waiting he was, though not at Lily's school, nor some neutral park. Chuck occupied Alistair's own apartment, a space meticulously cleansed of any hint of Silas. Harsh overhead fluorescence bleached the living room, leaving no corner unexposed. And at its heart stood Chuck, immobile as a monolith and no preamble. You led them to her, Silas. He spat, the name a poisoned dart. Gone was the familiar amusement in his eyes, replaced by the glint of polished stone. Alistair raised both hands in a gesture of supplication. I didn't. I swear to God. I would never endanger Lily. Chuck's scoff was a dry, rasping sound. Spare me. My sources confirm your affiliations. They know who you really are. They know what you are. He swept a hand encompassing the sterile apartment. The entire charade reeks of treachery. I didn't betray her, Chuck. They found me. They're using me as bait, to draw you and Lily out. Desperation tightened Alistair's voice. He glimpsed a flicker of doubt, quickly shuddered behind suspicion. He needed to break through, fast. Prove it, Chuck rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. Tell me something only Silas could possibly know. Alistair hesitated. Unearthing his past felt like tearing open old wounds, exposing tender flesh. But Lily's survival was at stake. He drew a steadying breath. Bucharest, Grigory Volk. The garrote disguised as a rosary. You covered my escape through the sewers, nearly drowned thanks to a ruptured pipe, complained about the stench for weeks afterwards. Chuck's face remained a mask for an agonizing moment. Then a grudging flicker of recognition sparked in his eyes. Damn you, Silas, he muttered, the venom tempered by reluctant acceptance. All right. Maybe you're not lying. Doesn't make you a saint. Just puts us on equal footing. Alistair shot back. They're hunting us both. Chuck, we need to be a team if Lily's going to survive. Chuck glared, jaw clenched. Team up with you? You're a moving target, a walking invitation for disaster. And you're an old warhorse, past your prime, Alistair retorted, sharper than he intended. The hammer may be a legend, but legends rust. You can't shield her alone. The atmosphere thrummed with animosity. Chuck advanced a step, his imposing physique dominating the space. Don't mistake my willingness to listen for leniency. Silas, I can still put you 6 feet under without breaking a sweat. And I'm capable of keeping you breathing, Alistair countered, refusing to yield ground. We both want the same thing, Chuck. Lily's safe. Can you swallow your animosity long enough to see that? Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Finally, Chuck exhaled, the sound heavy with resignation. Fine. He conceded, the word wrenched from him. Temporary alliance. Once Lily's secured, you and I settle our score, Silas. Understood. Alistair nodded. A precarious pact, forged in urgency and laced with distrust, but it was their only option. Understood. First priority, Chuck said, eyes narrowed to slits, is getting Lily out of the city, somewhere unreachable, somewhere they can't sniff her out. I have a cabin in the Poconos, Alistair suggested. Isolated, off the map. Good, Chuck replied. Then move. Time is a luxury we can't afford. He paused, his gaze drilling into Alistair. And Silas? One misstep, one sign of deceit, and I'll end you myself. Alistair met his gaze head-on, unflinching. Fair enough, Chuck. Fair enough. As they turned to leave, a disquieting knot tightened in Alistair's gut. He glanced back at the apartment, suddenly vulnerable, exposed. He couldn't shake the oppressive feeling that they were already out of time, that the syndicate was already several moves ahead, the asset. Alistair spread the photographs across the scarred mahogany table in Chuck's study. Each one depicted a dead man, their faces contorted in silent screams, each a whisper from Alistair's past. The syndicate was thorough. Recognize any of these vultures? Chuck grunted, his voice rough as sandpaper. He circled the table, a predatory gaze sweeping over the images. Alistair pointed to a man with a distinctive scar above his left eye. That's Gregor. Used to fence information for me. Good at what he did. Chuck stopped, his gaze intense. Used to? That's the operative word, Silas. What made them so expendable? They knew me. They knew what I did. And the syndicate doesn't like loose ends. Alistair picked up another photo, the image of a woman lying in a pool of blood. Her eyes wide with terror. A pang of guilt shot through him. He had led them all to this. Chuck slammed his fist on the table, rattling the photographs. Damn it, Alistair. This isn't some game. These are people who trusted you, who are now paying the price for your sins. I know, Alistair said, his voice low, and I intend to make things right. Chuck snorted. Right? You think you can just waltz in here and fix everything? You left this life for a reason, Silas. You weren't built for happy endings. Alistair ignored the barb. He focused on the back of each photograph, where cryptic symbols were etched into the paper. These markings. They're not random. It's a code. Chuck leaned in, his eyes narrowed. Syndicate code. Been a while since I've had to dust off that particular skill. He grabbed a worn leather-bound book from a shelf, its pages filled with handwritten notes and diagrams. Let's see what these bastards are trying to say. Hours passed. The air in the study grew thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Alistair and Chuck worked in silence, deciphering the symbols, piecing together the fragmented message. Finally, Chuck let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned, he said, his voice laced with disbelief. They're not just after you, Alistair. They're after something I have. What is it? Alistair asked, his senses on high alert. Chuck hesitated, his gaze drifting towards the closed door. Complicated. Years ago, I was on a retrieval mission in Prague. Some experimental tech was stolen from a lab, something the syndicate wanted badly. I managed to secure it. Thought it was just another piece of junk. A trophy. I stashed it away in a vault. Forgot all about it. A wave of nausea washed over Alistair. The syndicate didn't care about old scores. They were after something tangible, and Chuck had it. Chuck stood and walked to the window, staring out at the manicured lawn. His voice was a low rumble when he spoke again. It was chaos back then. The Iron Curtain was crumbling, and everyone was scrambling for power. I was just trying to keep my head above water, doing what I had to do to survive. Flashback. The narrow alleyway reeked of stale beer and desperation. Rain lashed down, turning the cobblestones into a slick, treacherous surface. Chuck, younger and leaner, wrestled with a hulking figure, his knuckles white as he gripped a metal briefcase. The figure roared, a guttural sound that echoed off the brick walls. Chuck slammed the briefcase into his opponent's face, the man crumpling to the ground with a groan. He grabbed the briefcase and disappeared into the maze of streets, the rain washing away the blood and the memory of the struggle. End flashback. Chuck turned back to Alistair, his face etched with a mixture of regret and determination. I never knew what was inside that briefcase. I just followed orders. What kind of tech are we talking about? Alistair pressed. Chuck shook his head. I don't know the specifics. But whatever it is, the syndicate wants it back. Badly. Alistair felt a knot tighten in his stomach. And they're willing to use Lily to get it. The realization hung heavy in the air. Lily wasn't just collateral damage. She was a pawn. The syndicate was using her to leverage Chuck, to force him to hand over the asset. The organization had probably been tracking him for years, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. They had used Alistair's reappearance to flush Chuck out. Chuck's eyes narrowed, his face hardening. They think they can use my daughter against me? They've made a grave mistake. He picked up the Colt .45 from his desk, the metal gleaming in the dim light. They want a war? Then let's give them one. Taken. The hall clock's chimes dissolved into a spray of splintering glass in his study. Pouring over the Prague file, Chuck recoiled as if struck. The eruption originated from Lily's room. A certainty that propelled him into motion before conscious thought could even take hold. He exploded into the corridor. The sedentary years sloughed off with each driven step. Alistair, drawn by the same shattering sound, emerged from the shaded recesses of the living room. His face a study in taut anticipation. Lily's door stood ajar, The jamb fractured around the lock, the air within tasted of iron and reeked of saccharine perfume. A solitary raven feather rested on the thick carpet. A dark exclamation point against Lily's pastel predilections. The window, gazing over the pristine gardens, was a jagged tear in the fabric of the room. A gateway to the inky expanse beyond. Chuck lurched into the space, his breath snagging in his throat. Lily! The word, normally a resonant growl, emerged as a strangled rasp. His gaze darted, cataloging the disarray. An overturned vanity, toppled books, the lingering ghost of violence. His eyes locked on a darkening patch blossoming on Thumper, Lily's cherished rabbit. Its ears perpetually askewed at a glacial, all-consuming rage surged through him. A dormant force he hadn't confronted since before Lily's arrival. That it threatened to incinerate the carefully constructed facade of normalcy he'd painstakingly maintained. His fists clenched, knuckles bone-white against tanned flesh. Damn them, he uttered, the sound a low, visceral tremor. Already at the window, Alistair, ever the pragmatist, employed his finely honed senses. 2 sets of prints marring the flower beds. Swift, clean, professionals. He indicated a subtle compression in the soil. Suppressors were used. No alarms tripped. Chuck remained deaf to his partner's observations. His world had narrowed to the stained bare, the spilled crimson, the unbearable specter of his daughter's peril. That he retrieved Thumper, cradling the toy as if holding Lily herself. The plush fur offered scant solace. Chuck! Alistair's voice, laced with urgency, cut through the haze. We move. Now. Time is bleeding away. Chuck straightened, steel entering his gaze. Grief and terror didn't vanish, but rather sublimated, coalescing into unwavering focus. Then we move. Direct me. Alistair, already working his phone, danced his fingers across the screen. Accessing my network. Need to know tonight's whispers. Anything that prickles the skin. Security system. See what breadcrumbs they left behind. Anything we can leverage. Chuck moved with an economy of motion that defied his age. He bypassed the compromised keypad, inserting a slender device into the control interface. Within seconds, the wounded system disgorged its data. He scrolled the feed, his gaze laser-sharp, pausing just prior to the disabling of the alarm. A blurry image, captured by the garden camera, revealed 2 masked figures clad in dark attire, shepherding Lily toward a waiting vehicle. Got it? He stated, his tone devoid of inflection. Black SUV, tinted, partial plate enough to trace the make, model, cross-reference local registrations. Good. Just received confirmation from Prague, Alistair stated, turning from the window. Syndicate op high-priority extraction. Destination. Classified. Prague. The name reverberated in the room, laden with unspoken implications. Coincidence it wasn't. A deliberate, calculated barb. Chuck's fist detonated against a nearby table, sending the remaining objects skittering. They want the tech. Think they can strong-arm me through Lily. They've badly misjudged their adversary. The carefully constructed comm imploded, exposing the simmering fury beneath. They took my daughter. Fatal error. Alistair nodded, his own expression hardening into resolution. I need access to that tech, schematics, specs, anything that provides an edge. Chuck marched back to his study. Activating a hidden panel in his desk, he withdrew a small metal case, its surface worn smooth by countless touches. Inside lay a nest of microchips and circuits, a chaotic tangle of wires and diodes. This is it, he said, handing the case to Alistair. What they crave. We'll dole it out. Slowly. He selected a weighty, leather-bound tome from the shelf, thumbing through its pages until he arrived at a bookmarked entry at a roster of contacts, gleaned from years of clandestine operations, informants and allies scattered across the globe. He began to place calls, his voice a low, urgent murmur. Alistair watched him, a flicker of something akin to respect illuminating his features. The hammer, dormant for so long, had returned, and this time, he had a far more personal reason to strike into the labyrinth. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the transport, each drop an echo of the frantic pulse in Chuck's throat. Alistair, an island of eerie composure, adjusted the calm peace nestled in his ear. South entrance. Lightly guarded. Our entry point. Chuck's knuckles whitened on the worn seat leather. Lightly is a matter of perspective. Silas, I doubt they're hosting a quilting circle. Hence, the element of surprise. Charles? Alistair countered, a flicker of amusement on his lips. He manipulated a humming device, a bespoke signal scrambler. Their security protocols are archaic. Impressive in their ferocity, ultimately predictable. The van lurched to a halt, the south entrance. A gaping loading dock carved into the side of what was once a brewery. The air hung thick with the tang of stale hops, cut with a sharp, metallic bite as they climbed out. Alistair extinguished the headlights, swallowing them in shadow. "Remember the plan?" Alistair murmured, patting the silenced pistol tucked at his hip. "I neutralize you. Convince." Chuck grunted. A wrench did the convincing better. Anyway, he grounded himself with the weight of the modified wrench in his hand, a familiar comfort against the storm inside him. They advanced, Alistair a wraith in the gloom. A solitary guard paced the bay, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Alistair moved with unnatural swiftness, a blur against the darkness. The guard collapsed, unheard, Alistair catching his fall. "Effective," Chuck rumbled, a whisper of disquiet at how easily Alistair extinguished a life. "Efficiency, Charles." Nothing more than that. Inside, the brewery sprawled, a catacomb of pipes, tanks, and idle conveyors. The air now coated the tongue with the sickly sweetness of fermentation. A jarring contrast to the frigid intent of their mission. Alistair's wrist-mounted device projected a holographic schemata. Motion detectors, infrared tripwires, pressure plates. "They're fond of their toys," he observed. With a deft wrist flick, he bypassed a laser grid, the jammer disrupting the beam. Chuck followed, his bulk making the passage feel like a squeeze. They ventured deeper, the city's sounds fading into a distant hum. They encountered more sentries, each engagement a fleeting, brutal ballet. Alistair subverted cameras, redirected patrols, sowing chaos in the syndicate's security net. Chuck, meanwhile, acted as the fulcrum. A solid strike to the temple. A stifled gasp. Another obstacle removed. "Control room, one level below," Alistair announced, gesturing toward a rusty service elevator. "We disable the internal lockdown there. Then we locate Lily." The elevator's descent was an eternity, each cable groan amplifying the tension. When the doors rasped open, they faced a fusillade. Chuck roared, diving forward, using the elevator's steel frame for shelter. Bullets whined and sparked against the metal. Alistair returned fire. Each shot surgically precise. Two guards went down, crumpling like puppets with severed strings. "Damn it, Silas! Didn't that figure into your calculations?" Chuck bellowed over the din. "Acceptable losses, Charles. Adaptability is paramount." Chuck surged from the elevator, the wrench a silver arc in his grip. That he moved with a speed that defied his age. Driven by a white-hot rage, he disarmed one assailant, slamming him into the wall with concussive force. Another brandished a knife, but Chuck pivoted, driving the wrench into the man's elbow. A scream tore the air, the knife clattering to the floor. Chuck showed no mercy, the wrench silencing the cry. Alistair laid down, suppressing fire, keeping the remaining guards pinned. That he was a specter of controlled fury, a phantom in the network. But Chuck glimpsed a shadow in his eyes, a darkness mirroring his own. Two haunted men, tethered by shared scars and a fierce need to protect the vulnerable. They secured the control room, Alistair swiftly disabling the lockdown. "Lily's coordinates are encrypted, but I can trace the signal. That she's further inside, near the old fermentation vats." Adrenaline surged through Chuck, a cold knot of resolve tightening in his gut. Let's retrieve her. They pressed on, the atmosphere growing colder, the cloying ferment accelerating into a choking cloud. Colossal fermentation tanks loomed, steel monoliths that clawed into the gloom. The place was a maze, constructed to confuse and disorient, but Chuck wasn't lost. His path was clear. He was getting his daughter back. He was going to exact his revenge. The hammer had come to life, confrontations. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood and stale beer as Chuck followed the muffled sobs. Each step crunched on shattered glass, a dissonant harmony to the cacophony of his roaring pulse. He found her in a small, grimy office, tucked away behind the fermentation tank's .3 syndicate goons. Looking more pathetic than menacing, stood guard Lily was slumped in a chair, her eyes wide with terror, duct tape cinching her mouth. Chuck's grip tightened on the pipe wrench. He saw the fear in Lily's eyes, the echo of a past he'd tried so desperately to bury. The hammer wanted to emerge, to paint the walls with these men's fear and blood. But looking at Lily, he saw only a little girl, not a pawn in a game of vengeance. Leave, Chuck growled, his voice a rasp. Walk away and you live. The goons exchanged nervous glances. Point 1. A skinny kid with a wispy mustache spoke up. Sorry, Pops. Orders are orders. He raised a pistol, his hand shaking. Chuck sighed that he didn't want this. He really didn't. Don't make me do this. The pistol wavered, but didn't lower. Chuck moved. A blur of denim and fury. The wrench connected with the first goon's temple. A sickening thud that echoed in the small room. The second barely had time to register what happened before Chuck's elbow slammed into his throat, silencing his gurgled cry. The kid with the mustache froze, eyes wide. His pistol dropping to the floor with a clatter. Chuck stood over him, the wrench dripping. He could end it here. Silence this witness. Embrace the darkness. That clawed at him. Lily whimpered, a muffled plea. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Then, he holstered the wrench, picked up the dropped zip ties, and secured the kid's hands behind his back. Get out of here, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Run. And don't ever let me see you again. The kid didn't need telling twice. He scrambled to his feet and bolted, disappearing through the doorway. Chuck knelt beside Lily, gently tearing the duct tape from her mouth. You okay, sweetheart? She launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest. I was so scared. Chuck, so scared. He held her tight, the scent of her hair a fragile anchor in the swirling storm within him. I know, baby. I know. But I'm here now. I'm here. Meanwhile, deeper within the brewery, Alistair moved with practiced ease. A ghost in the shadows, he'd bypassed the security grid, disabled the cameras in this section, and now stood before the reinforced door to Victor's makeshift office. He could hear Victor's voice, a low, rumbling baritone, through the steel. A necessary sacrifice, Dimitri. The tech is too valuable. Sentimentality has no place in this organization. Alistair's jaw tightened. Sentimentality. That was always Victor's excuse for his callous brutality. He punched in the override code, a sequence he'd memorized years ago, during his training. The door hissed open. Victor stood behind a makeshift desk, a satellite phone pressed to his ear. He was a mountain of a man, his face etched with the harsh lines of a life lived in the shadows. He looked up, his eyes, the same cold gray as a winter sky. Meeting Alistair's, he slowly lowered the phone. Silas, Victor said, his voice devoid of surprise. I expected you eventually, though I hoped you would be more reasonable. Reasonable, Alistair echoed, stepping into the room. You kidnapped Chuck's daughter. You're weaponizing experimental tech. What part of that is reasonable? Victor chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. You were always too idealistic, Silas. The world is not a playground for your morality. Power is the only currency that matters, and that tech, it will shift the balance of power in our favor. At what cost, Victor? How many innocent lives? Innocence is an illusion. Everyone is guilty of something. Silas. Some are just better at hiding it. Victor rose from his chair, his massive frame filling the small room. I offered you a place at the top. You chose sentimentality. Now you will pay the price. Alistair sighed. He'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that he could reason with Victor, but some men were too far gone. I always knew this would end one day. It's a shame it has to be like this. Victor lunged, his movements surprisingly fast for a man of his size. He threw a punch, a haymaker aimed at Alistair's head. Alistair ducked, the wind of the blow ruffling his hair. He countered with a swift kick to Victor's knee, throwing him off balance. The fight was brutal, a clash of styles and ideologies. Victor relied on brute strength and raw aggression, while Alistair used precision and agility. He danced around Victor's clumsy attacks, landing blows that targeted pressure points, disrupting his balance, slowing him down. Victor roared in frustration, grabbing a metal pipe from the floor and swinging it wildly. Alistair dodged, the pipe whistling past his ear. He saw an opening, a split second of vulnerability. He moved inside Victor's guard, delivering a sharp, precise strike to his throat. Victor gasped, clutching his neck. He staggered back, his eyes wide with pain and disbelief. Alistair followed up with a series of rapid blows, each one calculated to inflict maximum damage. He didn't want to kill Victor, but he couldn't afford to show mercy. Not now. Victor collapsed, a heap of broken strength and shattered ambition. Alistair stood over him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The fight was far from over. He still had to get Lily and Chuck out of here. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that the syndicate would not let them go easily. Debts repaid. Victor wheezed, Alistair's weight a crushing burden. The slick, spreading stain on his bespoke suit mocked his hubris. A faint, acrid tang hung in the air, emanating from the discarded stun baton. Alistair held the power to extinguish this flame of fanaticism, to silence him forever. Yet, a deeper restraint held him back. Victor, with all his vaulting ambition, was merely a manifestation of something far more insidious. This isn't dominion, Victor, Alistair murmured, a dangerous undercurrent in his tone. It's a gilded cage, a marionette's dance dictated by unseen hands. Victor's response was a blood-flecked cough, a crimson droplet marring Alistair's cheek. You fail to grasp it. This technology, it's the vanguard of tomorrow. The future demands a secure base, not a foundation plundered from ruined lives. Alistair countered, his grip intensifying. He saw the flicker of stark terror in Victor's gaze. Unleash the truth. Reveal the syndicate, Project Chimera, the unseen architects pulling the strings. Or I'll leave you to the authorities. They'll be intensely curious about your extracurricular pursuits. Victor vacillated, his aspirations clashing with the instinct for survival. Finally, he yielded, a cascade of information pouring forth. The syndicate's hierarchical structure, their ambitions of weaponizing cutting-edge tech, the web of venal officials and corporate entities that bankrolled them. He offered names, locations, dates, everything he believed would salvage his skin. Alistair absorbed it all, his mind a whirlwind of analysis. Lily's abduction was just one tendril of a larger scheme. The syndicate threatened to unleash global pandemonium. Enough, Alistair declared. Straightening up, he hauled Victor to his feet, ignoring the man's whimpered protests. The police are inbound. Ensure your story mirrors the one you've spun for me. He left Victor slumped against the wall, the oppressive weight of his treachery bearing down on him. Elsewhere, Chuck threaded the warehouse's convoluted arteries, his senses heightened. The preceding cacophony of screams and gunfire had ebbed, replaced by an unnerving stillness. He tracked the subtle trail of Lily's signature perfume. A guiding star in the enveloping gloom. He discovered her in a cramped, makeshift cell, the door ajar, the guard sprawled nearby. Unconscious, Lily catapulted into his embrace, burying her face in his chest. "Dad, I was so scared. I know, sweet pea, I know. But I'm here now." He held her close. Reveling in the reassuring weight of her small form, he assessed her for injuries. "Are you all right?" Chuck asked, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. "I'm okay, Dad. Just relieved to see you," Lily murmured into his coat. Chuck gently eased back, studying her eyes. He had almost succumbed to his rage, almost unleashed the hammer, but Lily's presence, her palpable warmth, anchored him. A choice presented itself. He couldn't safeguard her by reverting to the monster he had fought so hard to bury. "Let's go home," he said, taking her hand. Their escape route led them past numerous syndicate thugs, prone on the floor. Chuck had disarmed and subdued them, but resisted the urge to kill. He had exercised control, choosing restraint over vengeance, a minor triumph, but a significant one. Outside, distant sirens sliced through the night. Alistair waited, leaning against his car, the swirling emergency lights reflecting in his eyes. He watched Lily sprint toward him, enveloping him in a hug that he met. Chuck's gaze, a silent accord passing between them. "It's finished," Alistair said, fatigue lacing his tone. "For now." "Not quite," Chuck countered. "We have to ensure they can't target her again." Alistair offered a curt nod. He understood the unspoken implication. Dismantling the syndicate, exposing their machinations, and pursuing justice were paramount. The task was immense, but retreat was not an option. "Victor is in custody, with the names. It should secure her safety," Alistair stated. Chuck regarded Alistair anew, a fleeting hint of gratitude flickering in his eyes. Trust remained elusive, but he acknowledged the debt he owed. Alistair had rescued Lily's life, twice over. "You saved her, Silas." Alistair visibly recoiled at the archaic name. "It's Alistair now, Chuck. And Lily. She's deserving of our every effort." "You're right," Chuck responded, a faint smile gracing his lips. He glanced at Lily, her wide eyes fixed upon them. "Come on, Pumpkin. Let's get you home. I'll fix you your favorite meal." As they departed, leaving the pandemonium in their wake, Alistair watched them disappear into the night. A strange serenity settled over him, a sensation absent for an age. He had repaid a debt, not just to Lily, but to himself. A chance to redeem his past, to channel his abilities for good, had presented itself. The road ahead would be fraught with peril, but he was no longer isolated. He had Chuck, an unwilling ally, a formidable force, a man who, akin to himself, was battling for something worth sacrificing everything for, and perhaps, just perhaps, they could ultimately transcend their pasts and forge a future worth embracing. He retrieved his phone and dialed a number. A gravelly voice answered. "It's me. I need you to leak some information to the press. Something monumental." He paused, inhaling deeply. "The syndicate is about to encounter a very unpleasant series of events."